Welcome to Drive the Daf. Clear, structured explanation of the daily Daf in 20 minutes. You can even follow in the car.
Taanis Daf Chaf Aleph is primarily a number of stories about great Talmidei Chachamim and their merit. There's a Chuyos. The Gemara will tell stories about how their merit saved them from a collapsing wall or structure, and how their merit saved them from a plague. It'll also talk about when there was a possible disaster that was coming, and they were considering decreeing a fast day, and some reasons that they may or may not have wanted to decree that fast day. So the Gemara begins with the story of Ilfa and of Yochanan, both Taanis Chachamim, and it says that they were learning Torah together, and they came to something which was difficult for them to understand. And they said, let's go to work, we don't understand this, let's at least spend some time in business in order for us to be Mekayim, the Pasuk, Efes ki lo yeh b'chayavim. You should not have anybody poor amongst you, and therefore let's go make some money since we're not understanding this sugya anyway. So they went, and they sat down under a weak wall which was fit to collapse. And they sat down to eat lunch, and they were eating bread there, and two malachim came, and Rav Yochanan heard them having a conversation with each other. Elfa didn't hear anything. Rav Yochanan heard them. One said to the other, let's push the wall on them and kill them, because they're leaving the life of the world to come, Chayil Maba, and they're going to work. They're occupying themselves with mundane matters of temporary life of this world, trying to earn their living here. So the other one said, no, we have to leave them. We shouldn't push the wall down, because one of these two is his time has arrived for him to become great, and therefore we can't kill him now at this moment. It's not time for him to die. It's time for him to come great. So Rav Yochanan heard that, and Ilfa didn't hear it. Rav Yochanan asked Ilfa, did you hear anything? And he said, no, I didn't hear anything. So Rav Yochanan understood that since he heard it and the other one had not, he was the one who it was his time to become great, that something great was supposed to happen to him. So Rav Yochanan said to Ilfa, I'm going to go back to learn. I won't be able to make any money, so at least I'll fulfill the pasuk. Ki lo yechdal evyon mekav haaretz. It always has to be at least one poor person around, so I'll be the poor person. So he went back to yeshiva. Ilfa came later. By the time Ilfa came back, Rav Yochanan had already been appointed Rosh Yeshiva over them all. So they said to Ilfa, had you not gone to work, you could have been Rosh Yeshiva because you were greater than him. So Ilfa wanted to prove that he was still greater in learning than Rav Yochanan, even though he had gone to work. So he went and he hung himself. Hung doesn't mean like hung by the neck, but he perched on a very tall mast of a ship. And he said the following thing. He said, if anybody has any brisa of Rav Chia or Rav Oshia, and they can't find the source for it in the Mishnah, they can't find a comparable Mishnah of the Mishnayos, tell me, and if I can't find a Mishnah for you that reflects that brisa, I'll jump off this mast into the water and I'll drown. So an old man came and he said, okay, I have a question. There's a Mishnah that discusses what happens when somebody is about to die, and he gives instructions to a trustee of his estate how he should distribute his wealth to his inheritors. And he gives the following order. He says, I only want you to give my kids 1 shekel a week. Now, why did he say that? So, leaving aside the sugya of how a man has a right to restrict the distribution of his property to his inheritors, but let's say he can do that. But why did he say that? So the Gemara says, the Brisa says, the reason why he said that was in order to challenge his inheritors to go to work and make money on their own. He wanted them to be responsible. He didn't want them to live off his earnings and be secure. He wanted them to go set themselves up on their own feet. And therefore he said, only give them the minimum amount that they require to live. Says the Brisa, therefore, should the trustee find out that they need more than that to live, he should give them as much as they need to live. He didn't want to give them too little. He wanted to give them the minimum. So if it turns out that they need more than a shekel, let's say they needed 2 shekels, which is a coin called a selah, he should give those inheritors a selah per week. However, if the man said a different thing, if he said, don't give them more than a shekel, then he really only wanted to give them 1 shekel. He didn't want to give them more than that. He wanted to give them less than they needed, and therefore it doesn't matter how much they require. He should only give them 1 shekel. Now, in the first case where he said, give them a shekel, he didn't say, don't give them more. If he then gave further instructions and said that when my inheritors die, then my property should go to these other individuals, then he's clearly saving some of the property for other people, and he does not want it to be used up by his inheritors, and therefore he doesn't want you to give them more than a shekel. So this person came and he asked, Ilfa, where do you see this in the Mishnah? So Ilfa said, simple, this is Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir has an opinion called mitzvah l'kayim divrei hames. You should fulfill the words of the dead. If somebody gives instructions before he dies, you follow his words, even if they're contradictory to the laws of inheritance. Here, it would not seem logical that the inheritors should not receive the amount of their own property that they require to survive. But Rabbi Meir says, mitzvah l'kayim divrei hames, you should always fulfill the instructions of the dead. Okay, now the Gemara tells us the story of Nachum ish Gamzu. Two stories about Nachum ish Gamzu. Nachum ish Gamzu was a Tana. His name was Nachum. He was from a city called Gimzu. He was called Gamzu because whatever happened to him, he would say, this is for the good. Gamzu, this as well, is for the good. Tova. So the Gemara describes that at some point in his life, he was blind in both eyes. He was missing both arms and both legs. He had neither arms nor legs, and the entire whatever of the body he had left was filled with blisters. And he was lying in a house that was fit to collapse on a cot on the bed, and the legs of the bed were in pails of water so that ants shouldn't be able to crawl up the legs of the bed onto him because he couldn't remove them. So this is how he was, and his Talmidim wanted to move him out of the house because it was collapsing. They wanted to move the rest of the items out of the house as well. So they wanted to move him first, as covered. He's more important. They wanted to first move him. So he said to them, no, move everything else first, because as long as I'm here, my zechus, my merit, will keep the house standing. And therefore, it's not going to collapse. However, if you move me first, you're not going to get a chance to move everything else. So they followed his instructions. They moved everything else. And then they moved him, and as soon as they took him out of the house collapsed. So the Talmidim said, Rebbe, since your merit is so great that you're able to keep the house up, why are you in this condition? What happened to you? How is it possible that you're suffering so much? So he says, it's my own fault, and I caused this to myself, because what happened was that I was traveling along the road to my father-in-law's house, and I had with me 3 donkeys loaded with food. One had food, one had drink, and one had many different types of desserts. And a poor man came and stood next to me on the way, and he said, Rebbe, give me some food. And I said, okay, just a minute, let me unload the donkey. And I didn't get a chance to unload the donkey, and he died. I didn't act fast enough. So when I saw what had happened, that my laziness had caused him to die, so I fell on the ground, and I dropped on his face, and I said, my eyes, which did not have mercy upon you, should become blind. My hands that did not have mercy on your hands should be cut off. My feet that didn't have mercy on your feet should also be cut off. And I still wasn't comforted until I said my body should be full of blisters. And therefore I caused this own situation. So they said to him, woe is to us that we have to see you in such a terrible state like you are now. He said, no, woe would be to me if you wouldn't see me like this, because then I would be responsible for my actions in the world to come. At least I just have this now. Alright, the Gemara now relates the famous story that gave him the name Nachum ish Gamzu. It says there was a time when the Jewish people wanted to send a gift to the Caesar. They said, who should be the one to take it? It should be Nachum, because he often has miracles happen to him. They sent with him a suitcase filled with precious stones, jewels, and pearls. And he was traveling, and he spent the night in an inn. When he spent the night in an inn, some of the people who were there, the residents, not other visitors, but the people who lived there long term, the staff of the inn, they went and they wanted to steal all his things, so they emptied out the suitcase. In order that he shouldn't be able to tell, they filled it up with sand or dirt. So he traveled along the way, and at some stop later, he opened up the suitcase and he saw that it was full of dirt, and he said, okay, comes Latovo, whatever it is. When he came to the Roman emperor, the Caesar, he said, the Jews have given you a gift, and he gave him the suitcase. The Caesar opened it up and he said, oh, a suitcase full of sand. The Jews are making fun of me, I'm going to kill them all. Eliyahu Navi came at that moment, and he stood there, and he represented himself as one of the Caesar's advisors, and he said, wait, maybe this is special dirt, maybe this is special sand, maybe this is the sand of their grandfather Abraham. Whenever he would throw the dirt at his enemies, it would turn into knives and spears and swords and fly at them and kill them. Like the pasuk says, Yitin kafar charbo kikash nidav kashto, that his dirt flies like swords and the straw like arrows. So the Gemara relates that there was one country that the emperor was in a long-term war with. He was never able to defeat them. So they said, you know what, let's take this sand to the front and we'll throw it at them, we'll see what happens. They threw it at them, and indeed it did turn into weapons as predicted, and they were able to conquer that country. So they went and they put in the treasure house. This was very special sand. They were going to use it in the future. And they filled up the suitcase of Menachem Gamzu. In place of it, they filled it up with precious stones, diamonds, jewels, and pearls. And they sent him on his way with tremendous honor and respect. So when he came to the same hotel, we stayed in the same hotel, and he said, what did you do to the king that you got this great respect? And so he told them the story. So those people went and they knocked down their inn. They destroyed their house until they had a big pile of sand. And then he sent a message to the king and said, that sand's from here. This is the sand. You could come get more of that sand from us. We'll be happy to sell it to you for a rich price. So they went and they checked that sand to see if it worked. But unfortunately for them, it was not. It was just regular sand. And they went and they killed everybody from that inn for trying to deceive them. Okay, the Gemara now refers back to our Mishnah. Our Mishnah had said that the definition of a plague, of an epidemic, is where a city with 500 people in it loses 3 people to the plague in 3 days. The Gemara quotes a brisa that says that it's a ratio of deaths to population. The brisa says if you have a city that has in it 1,500 people, that's 3 times as many. There, so an example of that would be Kfar Akko. So a plague there would be if you lose 9 people in 3 days, 3 consecutive days, one after another, you lose 9 people to this plague. That counts as a plague, as an official dever that we would institute policies which we use to control plagues, such as creating a fast day. Now, the Brisa says that it's only if it was in 3 days. If it's all in 1 day, so that doesn't count because it's just a fluke. Doesn't mean that this is a long-term plague. And if it was spread over 4 days, that also would not count. That's not a plague either. So says the Brisa further, if you have a city that has 500 people in it, this is 1/3 the size of the previous, and it wouldn't be 9 people in 9 days, it would be 3 people in 3 days. An example of a city that size would be Kfar Amiku, and it would be 3 people in 3 days, and again, not in 1 day, not in 4 days, only in 3 days. So Gemara has a story here. Gemara says it was a city called Drocaris that had 500 people in it, and they lost 3 people in 1 day. And Rav Nachman bar Rav Chizda said, let's make a fast day, this is a problem. So Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak explained why would he say that. Didn't we see in the Brisa that it's only if it's in 3 days, not if it's in 1 day? So that he holds like Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir holds that if something happens spread out over a couple of days, certainly it's significant if it happens quicker, if it happens more concisely clumped together. The way you see that is in the discussion of how an ox changes from being a shar tam to being a shar muad, from being a tame ox to having a reputation as being a wild ox. So the Gemara learns from Psukim that if it gores 3 times spread over 3 days, then it's a shar hamuad. That is the halacha according to Yehuda only. Rabbi Meir says if it goes 3 times in 1 day, certainly it is a shar hamuad because it's goring even faster. And on that, Rabbi Yehuda disagrees, and he says no, that's a fluke. It could just be that he had a bad day. But here you see that Rabbi Meir says no, it's certainly, and therefore in our case also he would say it's certainly a problem if he had 3 deaths all in 1 day. Okay, so this is going to go further. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, Rav Nachman bar Rav Chizda said to Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, why don't you come and move close to us? Because your city, the town where you live, is a disreputable place. It's not an honorable place. It doesn't show honor to your name. Come here, live with us where it's an honorable place. So he said, a place is not supposed to honor the person is supposed to honor the place. Like we see in the Brisa, Rav Yossi says that a person is a credit to the place that he's in and not the other way around. Such as Har Sinai. Har Sinai, when the Shekhinah was on there, was Har Sinai. It had a special halachos, like the Torah says, the animals cannot graze on the mountain, but once the Shekhinah departed, so the mountain became just any other place, like it says, when you finish blowing the shofar, and the entire Maimon Har Sinai is over, everybody can go up the mountain. It did not have any Kedusha. Same thing applies to the Ol Moed itself, the Mishkan. As long as it was up and it was assembled, the Torah says, Chalzav, anybody who's tummy has to be sent out of the camp. However, once the brochus was rolled up and was ready to travel, that place was meaningless, and anybody could walk there, and there was no problem at all. So therefore, I'm not going to leave this place. I'm supposed to be honoring the place, not getting honor from the place. So they told him, okay, so maybe we should go live next to you. So he said, no, you are the son of a Talmid Chacham, you're the son of a Rav Chizda, I am just Rav Nachman, son of Yitzchak, and the son of 100 does not go to 100, the son of a slice. So you are a Talmid Chacham, and Talmid Chacham, my father, however, doesn't have smicha, you don't come live next to me. The Gemara now brings a number of incidents about plagues and people who were saved from it. So the Gemara says in the town of Surah, there was a plague, but in the neighborhood of Rav, there was no plague. They thought that must be in the schus of Rav. But those people who thought that we received a dream in which they were told Rav's schus is far too great for a little simple miracle like this. This miracle is in a different schus. It's in the schus of a man who keeps axe and a shovel, and then he lends it out to whoever needs to dig a grave. And that's a tremendous chesed. And in his merit, there were less graves. We don't have people in his neighborhood would not be affected by the plague, and therefore they were not dying. Now the Gemara says similarly, there was a fire. Fire was in the city of Surah. Was in the city of Durokeres, which is where Rav Huna lived, but it did not affect Rav Huna's neighborhood. In Rav Huna's neighborhood, there was no fire. And again, they thought it was in the merit of Rav Huna, but those people thought that we received a dream in which they were told it's not in the merit of Rav Huna. Rav Huna is far too great for such a tiny miracle. This miracle is in the merit of the woman who lived there, who always used to heat her oven. She would keep the fire burning from Erev Shabbos to Erev Shabbos, and anybody who needed to bake bread, she would allow them to come use her oven. And Gemara relates further that they once told Rav Yehuda there's a bunch of locusts on the way, so he wanted to decree a fast day. Said there's a terrible tzara, locusts, and they said to him, no, it's not going to destroy the crops. Well, he didn't accept that. He said, what do you mean? They're bringing along their own food, and they're not going to eat our food? For sure, they're going to destroy the crops, and therefore he decreed a fast day. Another incident that happened was that there was a plague amongst the pigs of the town. They were becoming sick and dying, and Rav Yehuda again wanted to decree a fast day, and they said to him, does that mean that you hold that a plague on one species of living creature in a town is also a plague on the other species, and it could jump from one to the other? So not necessarily. Pigs have the form of their intestines are similar to humans. They're not ruminants. Therefore, they have similar stomachs to humans, and therefore any plague that strikes them could strike us as well. And therefore, this is a terrible situation, and we need to fast. Now the Gemara says that they told Shmuel that there's a plague in a place called Beichazoi, which is far from where Shmuel was, and he decreed a fast day. So they said it's far away. So he said, what do you think? There's no way to get across. There's a river without a bridge across it that they won't be able to get to us. They'll be able to get to us just fine. So one asks a question from a similar story where they told Rav Nachman that there's a plague in Eretz Yisrael, and he decreed a fast day, and he said if the master got sick, then the servant is certainly going to get sick. So if in Eretz Yisrael there's a plague, here in Chutz La'aretz will certainly be at risk. So Gemara says, so you see that the only reason for that logic was because Eretz Yisrael is the master, and the community in Chutz La'aretz is the servant. If, however, you had two servants, just because one servant gets sick doesn't mean the other one will. So if you had two different regions in Chutz La'aretz that had a plague, there's no reason for the one that, if one region had a plague, there's no reason to decree a fast day. And the other reason, that's not like what Shmuel did, that he did decree a fast day, even though there was only a plague in a faraway place called Beichazai. Gemara says it's different. Beichazai, and the place where Shmuel was, which was, I believe, Narada, had common transportation between them. People traveled back from one to the other, often by caravan, and therefore there's a strong possibility of transmission of infection from one to the other. Now the Gemara relates the story of Abba Umna. Abba Umna was a bloodletter. Umna means a bloodletter. And he used to receive greetings from the Yeshiva Shalmaila, the Mesivta Dirikiya. He used to receive greetings every day. A voice would come and say, Shalom Alecha, Rebbe. Now Abaye got a greeting once a week on Erev Shabbos, and Rava got a greeting only once a year on Erev Yom Kippur. So it says that Abaye was upset he was he considered it a condemnation of himself that he did not get a greeting as often as Abba Umna. But they told him, you cannot possibly do some of the special chasadim that Abba Umna does. What did he do? So the Gemara says he used to do as follows. Whenever he would let blood, he would keep the men and women separate because of tznius. He would have the women wear a special garment that he designed so that he could let blood from them without seeing their skin. He would not collect money from people straight out. He had a box where they could put their money quietly if they had means to pay, and if they didn't, then they wouldn't be embarrassed. He never charged Talmid Chachamim for his services. After they left, he would put money in the box himself, and he would say, you should be healthy. And these are the things that he did. So the Gemara says that one day Abaye sent a pair of Talmid Chachamim to check out his actions, to inspect him. So they stayed by him, and he gave them to sleep, to eat, to drink, and he gave them beautiful woolen blankets to sleep on. So they took the blankets, they stole it from him, and they went on to the market, and they were offering to sell it. And they met none other than Abba Umna himself in the market. So they went over to him, and they said, hey, sir, can you evaluate these blankets and tell us how much they're worth? Meaning they're specifically showing it to him and waiting to see what his reaction would be. So he named the price. So they said, how do you know? Maybe it's worth more. So he said, no, because I have very similar ones, and that's how much I paid for it, so that's how much they're worth. So they said, these are actually yours, and we took them from you, but tell us, obviously you're not stupid, tell us what you thought when you saw us walking around with your blankets from your house. So he said, I assume that you have a mitzvah of pidyon shvuyim, you have a mitzvah to redeem somebody from prison, and you needed funds, but you were embarrassed to tell me and ask me for funds, and therefore you just took my blankets, and of course I allow you to take them and use them for pidyon shvuyim, no problem. They then said, okay, now we'll return it to you, and he said, no, don't return it to me from the moment that you took them, and I assume that that was what had happened. I had in mind that it should go for tzedakah, so it's already charity, it's already given away, so I can't take it back, use it for charity. Now the Gemara relates that Rava also was upset that he only got greeted from Shemayim once a year, not as often as Abaye, and Abaye comforted him and said, don't be afraid, you protect all the people in your city with your zechusim, so your zechusim are very great.
Drive the Daf is a project of the Grand Woodlands Shul and is presented by Rabbi Yitzchak Landa. Find us on YouTube or subscribe to daily emails by emailing drivethedaf@gmail.com.